Hi, my name is Lindsay Bjork, and I am the coordinator for strategic initiatives here in the Engler College of Business. And I am here with Dr. Sean Humpherys, socially distanced, of course. He is the associate professor of computer information systems and the holder of the Pickens Professorship of CIS. How are you?
I'm doing good, thank you.
Great. So let's get started. Tell us about your background and what helped you decide to become a professor.
Well, I've had a lot of people influence me over the years, and when I went to Brigham Young University, they had great professors there. It was great education, but they had one class on a pre-PhD class, and it was a Friday. Dr. Paul Lowry taught it, and he was a great scientist, and so the whole class was just about how do you do scientific research in the context of business. Well, I loved science, but I had never equated that a college of business does scientific work. Science, you think of chemistry and physics and things like that. But so it really opened my eye up. And in that class, it prepared us because we learned about the scientific method, officially about the scientific method, and then also about scientific research in a business context. And also, we got to work on an actual project, and which eventually became published. So that was very eye-opening. And that College of Business faculty professors, one of their responsibilities is to do scientific research, and that really appealed to me. And so that's why I wanted to then to be a professor, because I had been a consultant before that. I was in consulting for a long time. And then that led to, okay, well, now I have the time and the money to actually go back and get my degree, because I didn't have a bachelor's. I actually did not earn my bachelor's and master's until I was 36.
Oh, really?
So I was an older student. So I relate to a lot of the students that are returning after being in the workforce for a long time or starting anew, and that was me, because I had been a consultant or doing computer work. So. Enjoyed it and really liked that class, and saw, well, now I can love teaching and science together with all of the technology and the consulting. I can now teach my students. So that's where it led.
That's cool. So what's your favorite class to teach?
Favorite class to teach? Probably beginning programming.
Okay.
And it's called Programming Fundamentals, CIDM 1315. I love that class for a couple reasons. One is it's fun. It's about building websites and learning some principles of programming. So I tie in that we're not just here to learn to program, but the context is business. We're solving business problems. So what's the business problems we need to solve, and structuring that. But students like that class because they actually get to see the end result. You know, they build it and they go, oh, I got a website, here it is. or oh, I made the program do this. And then we put it together so it becomes a web application, not just a static website or just a program, but it becomes a web application that takes input, calculates, does something, solves a problem, and then gives the right answer or outputs something useful. So I like that class because students can see the end result of their actions. I also like the class because even though I do a lot of technical and scientific work in my fraud detection, programming computers to find fraud, being able to explain concepts simple to novices is a challenge. And I like that challenge. And so I am thrilled to be able to have that challenge, and that every semester it's a new challenge of, okay, well, they didn't get that. How can I adapt so that they did get it? Or, okay, my normal technique isn't working with a student. These are my thought processes. I'm not saying this out loud. This person's not getting it. What do I need to do? What question can I ask? How can I help them without just giving them the answer? How can I help them to lead them to it? And so sometimes that challenge of being able to explain it and simplify it so that somebody can then get it and internalize it, and then they go, oh, I understand now, and I see that they get it. That's an exciting moment.
Sure, that light bulb moment everybody talks about. That's cool. So you won the COB Teaching Excellence Award last year, as well as the WT Distinguished Graduate Faculty Award for 2020. So we have a couple questions for you about your teaching. Explain your teaching philosophy or your teaching style.
What is my teaching philosophy? My teaching philosophy is called learner-centered teaching.
Okay.
It's my teaching mentor at the University of Arizona when I was in my PhD program. Is they coupled science learning, PhD science learning, with also learning how to teach. And Kyla Macario and Dr. King were two mentors of mine there that really helped me refine that. My parents taught me how to love to teach, and through their example, my Macario and King, they taught me how the techniques. And a learner-centered teaching philosophy is in contrast to more of a traditional teaching philosophy where I'm concerned as a instructor about what am I going to teach, how am I going to lecture, what content am I going to give. Learner-centered focuses more on how do people learn and how can I assure that they're actually learning. Because it's one thing to say, read chapter 5 and you're going to have a test on all of this and it's a multiple choice question. But or listen to my lecture and hopefully they write it all down and then they remember it long enough to get it on the test. But the question is that learning? Learner-centered teaching then has several principles, but basically it's like focusing on, are they learning? And people learn differently. And so adapting to the learning. As a professor then we shift then from a lecturer to an environment creator. What's the environment that I can create to facilitate the learning? And using science, not just I think this, unless I'm experimenting with it, but not just a gut feel, but also what can we learn from science and the way people learn, brain scans and actual experiments, and then bringing that into the classroom of, okay, well, this is the way some people learn. How can I teach to it? How can I use that tool? So they were very influential and in helping me focus on. It's about the learning. How can I assure that they learn? Some of the ways are, for example, they taught me about Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences. Is that their intelligence, Howard Gardner described intelligence in a much broader sense of knowledge and application of the knowledge, and came up with 8 different types of intelligences that he defined in terms of logical intelligence or communicating, writing intelligence, but also in the physical world, being able to manipulate physical objects and create things, and the natural intelligence of being able to see patterns in nature, music, that's, I forget the exact terms, but interpersonal intelligence and just these other things that are categorized as in skills and knowledge and application of them and these domains. So being able to bring and recognize that there's more than just writing down a test or writing a paper. There's a broader aspect. And Bloom's taxonomy, they taught me about Bloom's taxonomy of Dr. Bloom's categorized a higher order of thinking. And in that as a lower level of cognitive thinking, not bad, just lower level of cognitive thinking is being able to understand and remember things, facts and figures. And you got to have it. But then you build up on top of that to being able to analyze and evaluate or apply, and then ultimately to be able to then synthesize and create. And it requires a lot more cognitive thinking at those higher levels and the lower levels. Well, science has taught us that that as professors, we claim or desire to teach up here, creative thinking and creating, but yet we actually teach down here, facts and figures, and look at our multiple choice exams. And so solving that dichotomy or that elevating up to where we want to be is what learner-centered teaching, and other philosophies do that too, but learning, focusing on the learner and helping that and changing things. And for example, Jo Boaler is a math professor and scientist, and she is looking at what do we know about learning in math, and how, and then I'm learning it because how do I apply it to learning technology, and it's about, and so she's come up with problem-based learning. Is you take a problem, and so instead of coming into the classroom and saying these are the 10 things I want to teach you, which we need to know, as professors and designers, we design the environment. These are the 10 things we need the student to know. But then coming in and saying the environment is going to be a problem-based. Give them a problem. let them work at it. Let them struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Part of being a good, according to her, part of in science is learning to struggle with problems is okay, and taking time to work through it. That great mathematicians are deep thinkers and slow thinkers who usually say, I had trouble in school because it was all, quick, fast stuff. But they do quick. And so some of these, applying that to, okay, now how can I come into a business class and say, okay, well, what's the problem? I'm not just teaching how to build a website and how to add cascading style sheets, external cascading style sheets or something. So what's the business problem? And saying, okay, everybody, here's the problem. How do we solve it? Mm-hmm. So now how do I apply all of this? Mm-hmm. Well, in class, I try and not just teach one way. Not just come in and just do a lecture, because that meets Howard Gardner multiple intelligence. It meets one type of student's needs, but misses many others. Mm-hmm. So changing up how I teach. Dr. Bowler's problem-based learning and curiosity from the others that I mentioned. Coming in and saying, here's a problem. What are you going to do to solve it? Mm-hmm. And instead of when a student has a problem or asks a question, bouncing it back to other students, saying, okay, how would you solve that problem? Or using a Socratic method and asking questions instead of saying, oh yeah, your error's on line 10 right here. You need to, you forgot a semicolon, or the logic right there is different. Here's what you need to do, x equals times whatever. Mm-hmm. Instead of saying that, just saying, okay, where do you think your problem is? Okay, how can we find out? Well, I don't know. Well, okay, well, how can we find? Let's put a debug right. Let's put a debug halfway through. You find out, leading them through. Do you remember we talked about this concept? Go to Google and remember how to do that, and so getting them to think and answer the question. So that's lots of hands-on too. Learner-centered teaching shows the scientific literature behind it shows that we learn when we do things. And it's not just a matter of practice, but in our brains, we learn. What is learning? Let's go back to cognitive science. Learning is when neurons form new dendrites and new connections that weren't there before, or create new pathways through dendrites that we didn't know before. So learning is actually a biological process in our brain. And so if we understand that as educators, then we know that, okay, we got to have repetition. A neuron has a natural process of decoupling itself. That's part of the learning process of the brain, of the nature of the brain, so that it doesn't have to learn everything. So it reinforces what's important and defocuses on what's not important. So how can we know it? Well, we apply that in that we're repetitive with the things that we teach, either repetitive in an assignment or repetitive in something. Well, what about tactile? I learned this from Dr. Montessori. My mother-in-law was a Montessori teacher. And so I love the philosophy of Montessori, which is people are very curious, again, curiosity, and using all the senses to learn. Dr. Montessori was very tactile, very sensual in terms of using the senses to learn. So I try in my classes to create learning activities that get them on the keyboard to code and to build, or to get them into groups to collaborate and investigate on a problem, because then they're using other senses and other skills, and they're reinforcing their learning. The more time that they can have on the keyboard building, what's happening in the brain? Those pathways are reinforcing. And the more those pathways reinforce, we now have permanence in learning. So all of it is coupled. I put all of that under learner-centered teaching of what does it take to learn from a cognitive science point of view, from best practices point of view, from what other science says, and what these other great educators. So I'm just borrowing what all the great scientists and great educators are doing and applying it. That's my secret.
Wow. What do you do to make technical courses easy to learn?
Easy to learn. Okay, so what do I make it to make it easy to learn? Let's strike the word easy. Okay? Because I think sometimes as professors, we want to make things easier, or students want to do the easy thing.
Sure.
And that robs them of the learning.
Okay, that makes sense.
So, so just because something is hard, it can be extremely enjoyable. It can be extremely enjoyable. In fact, the deep thinkers, going back to Dr. Bowler, great mathematicians are those that think slow and think deep on hard, interesting problems. So I think the first thing there is let's embrace the hardness, but let's create the environment so that the hardness doesn't negatively impact their learning. Like if it was just anybody can make a hard class, don't tell them anything. Just tell them here it is. Just don't teach well. Just and then penalize them. But like Dr. Schaefer and I have had Dr. Jonathan Schaefer here at the university, he and I have had a lot of conversations of how do we help students through the struggle of learning so that they can do hard things. So let's embrace the hardness, but let's not just penalize them at the first failure. So one of the things that I do is I have lots of learning activities. Like in the beginning programming class, I'll have 20 or so learning activities throughout the semester where they're coding a lot of things, but they can do it as many times as they want. If they fail, great. I mark it as pass or fail, but they can do it again, and they can do it again, and they can do it again, and they can do it again until they actually learn it. So that's one of the philosophies of learner-centered teaching. Science shows that at the beginning, across the bottom of the axis is time, time that progresses along, and the top of the axis is engagement in the class, mental engagement, the cognitive presence in the engagement. And at the beginning of the class, it's really high with students. And then after a while, it drops down. People get bored. Their phones start coming out. And then after a while, oh no, there's 10 minutes left in class. I better start paying attention. And then it comes back up again at the last 10 minutes. What did the professor say? Oh, they're saying that she's saying the last couple important things. So learner-centered teaching, that's a scientific observation. Learner-centered teaching then says, okay, well, if we about every 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes is when we start to disengage cognitively. And so we need something else right here at 10 minutes. And we need something else right here at 10 minutes. And then you just go through your tools. Well, do we need a pair-share discussion where I get people together and they talk about a particular problem or share ideas? Or do I do a wall chart activity where they write, I put up thoughtful questions and they all go around the room and write up ideas. And they're moving, the blood's flowing. Or is this when I pull out multiple intelligences and do something uniquely different? So every 10 minutes we're doing something different. Now that's what science tells us, is how to re-engage a person, because when they're engaged like that, they then learn. Because again, what's happening in the brain? The neurons are reinforcing it. We're growing new dendrites in the neurons, and we're reinforcing the connections that are important.
How do you connect with and motivate your students?
Motivation is a hard thing. Ultimately, we can't make anybody be motivated. Motivation is an internal state of a curiosity. We'll go back to what we've talked about, the other professors that have talked about the importance of curiosity. So can I create an environment, as a professor, can I create an environment where the likelihood, not guaranteed, but the likelihood of a student being curious or self-motivated increases? Well, yeah, I can. I can certainly do things that demotivate, stand up there for 75 minutes and lecture and talk and talk and talk. And to help some of them, I teach 7 Habits of Highly Effective People in my class because it helps people realize that they have choices, and those choices have consequences. And effective people look at those consequences and make choices not to do what feels good now. I love Star Trek. Love Star Trek. I could watch Star Trek all day long. Reruns. But what's the consequence? What are my other goals? And so you bring that in to try and help them see what their goals are. One of the activities we do in a class is I just have them dream. I remember hearing on NPR when I was 17 about a 17-year-old who was wanted to be an astronaut. And he said he wrote down all of his goals. Astronauts are very ambitious people, and he succeeded, but he wrote down all of the things he wanted to learn and do. And I thought, that's a great idea. And I wrote down all the things that I wanted to learn and do: play the cello, learn Spanish, become a black belt in martial arts, and to create a robotic arm that you can control with your mind. Haven't done that one yet. But as I looked at the list, I'm like, wow, this is cool. I've been able to accomplish race sailboats. I've been able to accomplish that because I dreamed. And so I think sometimes we don't dream enough. And so in my class, I actually have them do an activity where we dream. They take out a sheet of paper and they write, and they if you could learn anything, what would you learn? That's curiosity.